Well, we start 6:15 sharp. That's great. That's as punctual as we get. So I'm going to do this standing because I've got my phone here, and then I'm going to sit down, no worries. So welcome to our closing panel, What is Europe to the Left? I'm going to briefly say a few words about Platypus. It has been introduced quite a lot, but still. The Platypus Affiliated Society is an educational project founded in 2006 in Chicago. We organize reading groups, public fora, research, and journalism on the history of the left, specifically on the problems and tasks brought to us by the old left, 1920s, 30s, new left, 60s, 70s, and post-political left, 1980s, 90s. Platypus seeks to investigate the possibilities of emancipatory politics today. We are organized in local chapters across the globe, so if you don't know, our Leipzig chapter here has a regular reading group, which takes place Monday from 7 to 10 p.m. at the Liebknecht House in the Braustraße 15. Feel free to join at any time during the semester. We will be reading the RBCS next Monday. We also have a weekly coffee break that usually takes place at the Café Alibi, which is in the Albertina Library. And this is on Thursday at 4 p.m. And it's a great option to talk about current events on the left. So back to our panel, What is Europe to the Left? I'm going to read the prompt of the panel, and after that I'm going to briefly introduce each speaker. So, what is Europe to the left? A decade ago, at the height of the European debt crisis, the critique of the EU, the discovery of possibilities for its transformation or overcoming, seemed to be the central task of the left. This was forcefully expressed by the emergence of the populist electoral formations SYRIZA and Podemos, but after their failure and collapse, critique increasingly came from the strengthening right, pushing the left into a defense of the status quo, often in the name of anti-fascism. This rearguard maneuver has been expedited by the second election of Donald Trump as President of the United States. Trump's ambition to renegotiate the terms of global capitalism, seemingly ushering in the end of the neoliberal configuration, has provoked a desire in the European establishment for the military and economic independence of the quote-unquote last liberal stronghold, a desire which is not without sympathy on the left. This raises not only the question of the EU, but of Europe in general as an quote-unquote American invention since the end of the Second World War. An ambiguous fate conditioned by the prior failure of the international working class to make socialism, and in so doing, honor the radical tradition of the 18th century when the dream of a cosmopolitan Europe in a state of lasting peace that would lead the world to freedom was articulated by such thinkers as l'Abbé de Saint-Pierre, Rousseau, and Kant. Today, in 2025, the political horizon for the left in Europe is unclear. So we asked our panelists, what is Europe to the left today, and what was it in the past? Is there a leftist vision for Europe? Is there even a European left? How should the left in Europe relate to the post-neoliberal transformation of capitalism? Does what is new provide a potential for leftist politics? What is the meaning of the European left's activities in the 2000s and 2010s for the next generation? If a verdict of failure is self-evident, what potentialities were missed? If gains were made? If the left has been strengthened by its experience, how is this the case? Does the world revolution still rest on the fate of Europe? This was once impossible to deny. If it is no longer the case, what is the purpose of left politics in Europe today? So I'm going to introduce very briefly each speaker, and after that you have 10 minutes each to present your opening remarks. After that we have 2 to 3 minutes for reactions to each other, and after that we will open for questions from the audience. I'm going to present you in the order in which you are speaking. It's four panelists, not 6, by the way. So you might want to raise your hand so we recognize it. So Johannes Fehr is working as organizing director for DiEM25, the Democracy in Europe movement in Germany, and is co-leader of DiEM25's political party in Germany, Mera25. He grew up in a German village close to Kassel in the center of the country and lives in Berlin today. He's an online and offline organizer for left politics in Germany, Europe, and beyond. Dominique Pagani is a philosopher, a specialist of Rousseau, Hegel, and Marx. He's the author of Femininity and Community in Hegel. Former member of the French Communist Party, he is known for his close collaboration with the philosopher Michel Cluscar. Ruth Kinner works at Loughborough University in the UK. She's the author of The Government of No One and co-author with Alex Pritchard at Exeter University of Constitutionalizing Anarchy, a book about anarchy and the Constitution due to be published next year. And last but not least, we have Inga Solti, who is a political journalist and writer. He's a research fellow at the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation and regularly publishes on foreign and peace policies. Inga is also working on the book series Marxism, which he gave a workshop on earlier today. Warm welcome to our speakers, and Johannes, if you could start.
Thank you for the introduction and also the invitation, and great to be here. Also, me as having left university over 10 years ago, it's the first time that I'm sitting on this part of a university lecture hall, and it's quite impressive, I have to say. Great to see so many faces. Europe to the left. I think it's a great topic, and it's one of the core topics, of course, of DiEM25, the movement that I'm part of. Almost 10 years ago, DiEM25 was founded in Berlin, and it was founded as a reaction to what happened before, which has partly been mentioned by you now, the 2008 crisis, the banking crisis, which is also was for me personally my political kind of awakening or re-questioning a lot about the system that we live in, because there was a banking crisis, and then it turned out that the banks were being saved and the people should pay. The banks were being saved at the cost of the people. And in that time, of course, there was, as also has been mentioned, the SYRIZA, the other, especially Southern European leftist movements that even in Greece, for example, made it to power, but then had the European establishment, the EU, and also the international financial organizations against them, and didn't actually succeed in bringing the revolution that they were promising, or the change that they were promising, into the life of peoples and into the reality. And out of this capitulation then in the end of these left parties in the south of Europe, and of course in the center of Europe here in Germany, we have to admit that we didn't even made it to that stage to take over government. Out of that experience, DiEM25 was founded as an internationalist movement, and as a movement that works beyond borders and doesn't just try to change politics in one country, because that is something that is probably bound to fail. One thing that I think is to be mentioned that was missing and is still missing today is a media sphere, a sphere of organizations where we talk about politics beyond the mainstream media, beyond our dominating state media organizations that could have actually told a different story about Greece and mobilized support also beyond the borders of Greece for left change there. I think it's still probably, if you ask Germans on the street today, that you will hear answers like the Greeks, they were lazy, it was their fault, right? They were bankrupt, we had to pay for them. These kind of dividing politics of the ruling class that, were dividing people, in this case, between national borders, were quite successful, and the left wasn't able to do something against it. And I think we can still see that today. In DiEM25, we are trying to work against that, and Platypus is of course also an organization that works beyond borders, and so is trying to play a part in that. But for example, if you take the very recent hopeful example of the young students uprising in Serbia, right? I think we in Germany are really not well informed about what's going on there. It's like it was a mass movement on the streets of a country in Europe that has an authoritarian government, and I think the knowledge and support from outside of Serbia wasn't there. And I think so still in the left today we have a lot to learn from other European examples and other countries, but we're not there yet to actually then mobilize support also for these left hopeful movements somewhere else. And I think this is what we need to work towards, that we build some kind of mass movement of the working class to actually be able to change something in politics, because Europe, that was also one of the questions, still matters, I think. We have very similar histories in Europe about our colonial past and present. We have a responsibility towards the rest of the world to work on actually changing something about even the colonialist present. So I think the European left and what is left of it is more necessary than ever, and we have to try to actually build towards being stronger and being actually able to do something against the European ruling class, which is still doing the same thing as they were doing. And actually, I think also the stories in the different European countries are pretty similar in terms of the surging of the far right, the politics of the center actually already implementing the policies of the far right, and at the same time the divide between the poor and the few rich are actually getting bigger. I think that's also similar stories across Europe. At the same time, I think you could also see back then in the banking crisis, of course, those moments when capitalism is in crisis, it's always also a chance. It was a chance for the leftist movement in Southern Europe, and some of them were making waves, right? They didn't succeed in the end, but they were trying, and they achieved something. And I think it's also always lessons that are learned during that time. Whenever there is, let's say, like a glitch in the matrix, right? When people are waking up and they're actually starting to question me, then the whole financial system and the banking system and how it actually works and for whom it works, right? Most recently, Gaza, genocide, the European establishment, the European countries, the European government supporting it. This has woken up a lot of people, and there was huge mass movements on the streets, something that we have also been involved in, and then you have a new chance to speak to people beyond this, of course, horrible today example of abysmal politics of our states and our governments, but then you can go beyond that, and every time it's a chance to speak to people, reach them, and actually hopefully bring them to the left and also organize them. I think also there The European left, of course, is not it's a pretty scattered different organizations across different countries, also scattered in the different countries. But there are also examples where you can see that in some areas there is a bit of power. For example, when the Italian unions organized a general strike against the support of a genocide in their countries and actually bring the country to a halt for one day. If you look at the party politics, you can look at the Belgian Workers' Party, for example, having a pretty good electoral results and doing a very good opposition politics in party politics. So you can see that in Europe things are also possible. I think other examples, of course, when these glitches in the matrix appear and when the left has a chance to talk to people and organize them, are of course also the war in Ukraine. You can still now see has been going on for over 3.5 years. Tens of thousands of young men, Russians, Ukrainians have been dying on the battlefield. A lot of civilians have been dying. And I think when people see this, there's also always a chance for people wake up and say no. Now also in Germany, we are rearming. We are putting, again, the mandatory military service. So this is again a chance for people to wake up. And I think I wanted to mention one more example, which I think has not been talked about a lot, but in Germany, I think I was surprised that some people have been blowing up a pretty big gas pipeline, German/Russian infrastructure, and for some reason it's not a big topic in the media. It comes up here and there a little bit. Well, who was it, right? Who has been doing this? And I think that's another point where people are actually, having question marks and saying like, well, who's that? Now the Polish state has someone in custody that is actually in question of having something to do with it, but the Polish state doesn't actually want the German authorities to have that person over and talk to him. So you can also see that the old powers in Europe, the nationalist powers, are still also having something to say. The nation states protecting their interests and actually working towards each other also. And if you are on the nationalist, on the nation state level, or on the European, on the EU level, wherever you are, you have a ruling class against you. And so I think the question is not, do we want the EU or not, or do we want the nation state or not? The question is, we want to organize people, and we want to organize people together to actually be able to work for their interest, not for the interest of the EU, not for the interest of their nation states and their ruling classes. Yes.
Last sentence, please. Or
yes.
Please come to an end.
I'm sorry. I was actually thinking that 10 minutes is pretty long, and now I've probably already overdone it. Okay, two things towards the end. Apologies. I think two things are really, really important, which is materialist thinking, so the difference between the capital owners and the people that have to do the labor. I think those are things that we always have to keep in mind when we organize people. And the other vital thing is internationalist thinking. So not think in the borders of Europe, your nation state, but always think beyond that. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. You hear me? Okay. First of all, I must be warning you. I am speaking English like a French one. I mean, like the average of French people. In second part, I must thank. I have great gratitude with Platypus organization. It's new for me. a lot of months, thanks to Luca, thanks to everybody to be here this evening. It's therefore I am complotist. Merci, Luca. I begin to be quite comic because it's our theme is not comic, and I appreciate the precedent speaking of my neighbor. From Europe began not so far away in the past, the two risest, hugest massacre in the world story. From Europe. This is Europe we gave lesson of human rights in the whole world. I was born in Vietnam. I spent a lot of years in Sub-Saharan Africa. Ich habe nicht said Black Africa, I am politically correct. We must first be thinking that it's not zufällig, comment on dit en anglais? Oui. It's not only a hazard, huh? This violence. The first great European hero in the narration is Odysseus, Ulysses. You know? His Odyssey begins with a carnage, massacre, carnage. I prefer to massacre because you see the red bloody flesh in carnage, you know? I'm speaking of the horse, huh? Everybody know. It's an idea of Odysseus. Huh? It's a nightmare. It's in my home, in the center of Ilion, Troy. I am with my wife in my bed, and I find in security. And the enemy is here, inside the walls. Yes, Pagani, but you know that is the beginning after happy end. After 10 years war, 10 years on the sea, on the ocean, with a lot of stopover, with each time an island, a woman. We are out of the massacre, of the carnage. We have the peace. With violence come back, and it's repeat. Bis, the false happy end, which is a terrible massacre, the massacre of the pretenders. Read the text. I hate the interpretation. It's you analyze the text. There is piece of brains on the walls, arrows in eye, and so on. For me, it's the beginning of specific violence. I am not based on ontologic thinking. I am not telling it's a genetic of European stupid. When I was so young as you, It's not so far in the past. The right in Europe, mainly the far right, was for Europe, against de Gaulle and against the Communist Party in France, for example. In the first time, the Europeophilie, I adore Europe. I say that first, and I continue. But this little Europe with Brussels as chief town was against the best period economically we had when there was in France the Gaullist at right and the communist at left. That is, you can measure it. It's not an opinion economically. I voted against de Gaulle for all the period he was there. I have the right to recognize what the Communist Party called at this time a lot of positive point in the foreign politique of the General de Gaulle. Zum Beispiel Discours de Phnom Penh, Vietnam, and when he has fired the direction of NATO, who was near Paris in Fontainebleau, and now in Brussels. But when there was a crisis of the missile of Cuba missiles, I think that everybody understand what I speak from. De Gaulle said to Kennedy, "We are with you." He was not against the Atlantic Alliance. He was against what we call in French le commandement intégré.
Integrated command.
Integrated command. So if there is a converse Texan who decide to make the Third World War with nuclear weapons, as an American, maybe it's Macron who began. Merci. Mais you are not obliged, as French, to follow. Donc, Europe is not a simple idea. It's the best and the worst. And therefore, my end will be a little more abstract and logic. It's like Europe is directed politically since its beginning, by center. Centre-gauche, centre-droit, Mitterrand, Giscard d'Estaing, it's the same. It's the same for Europe, for NATO. And I compare it would be my conclusion, to a segment A, B, with a point in the middle, point M. AM is painted in blue, MB is painted in red. The point M is purple, violet. Unbestimmt auf Deutsch. Not precise, not clear. It would be my conclusion. No, last words. I am very interested, and I have admiration with the spirit of platypus. I know not much time, but you have the art in platypus to ask questions, to put problems. It's more important than solution and answer. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm going to stand up because I feel a little bit dwarfed by this bench. My comments relate to ideas advanced by the anarchist left in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Broadly, the period after 1871, when anarchism emerged as a separate current within the international or the European socialist movement, to the end of the Second World War or the consolidation of the welfare state. So I want to outline the critique. I want to say something about the 21st century development of anarchism and its applications in relation to the question about Europe. So the first question, what is Europe to the left today and what was it in the past? So the answer that emerges from anarchist critique is that Europe is a failed constitutional project. And this has three interrelated parts. So first, liberals and republicans championed liberty, equality and fraternity and fatally compromised these ideas in their constitutions. So they reinvented the sovereign as the people. They defended an idea of rights that was grounded in the exclusive protection of property, thus harnessing capitalism. And they used the state's monopoly of violence to enforce the systematic inequalities that it produced. Second, Europe emerged from Christendom through war. The 1815 Treaty of Vienna constituted Europe as a system of rival sovereigns, pitting constitutional against absolutist regimes and normalizing international rivalries through militarism. Third, European constitutionalism unleashed a nationalist demand for self-government, reinforcing territorialization and incentivizing processes of social homogenization. So the standardization of language, religion, education, spurious race science, and national myth-making were all part of that. So that was what Europe was to the anarchist left in the 19th century. Europe is constituted along the same basic lines today, though it's no longer a global hegemon, and its empires have now largely disappeared. So the second question, how should the left in Europe relate to the post-neoliberal transformation of capitalism? I wasn't quite sure what this question meant, but basically I think the left should relate to capitalism as anti-capitalists. I mean, that's what they should do. Capitalism, like statism, is a protean force. From the anarchist perspective, it's also integral to statism. During the first globalization, that is the years leading up to the First World War, anarchists analysed the symbiotic relationship between government and corporate and financial elites to explain how state agendas were geared towards capital accumulation through militarism, colonialism and war. Post-war anarchists like Colin Ward used the term warfarism to describe the bargain governments struck with the corporations to advance the same agendas in the modern era of liberal democracy. So, politics changed, but the patterns of power did not. We see the same nexus today in the relationship between successive US administrations and the tech giants. Right libertarianism succeeds through state support, both legal and financial. The demand for deregulation is a demand for the state to remove the democratic controls on this support and undo the perceived burdens of welfare. The opportunities for left politics can only be found from within the existing regulatory frameworks, and these are never entirely closed. Yet I think the potential lies in the creation of alternative, plural, and genuinely self-governing systems, not the attempt to regulate the system of exploitation by attempting to control it. We end up with purple. So what is the meaning of the Europeans' left's activities in the 2000s and 2010s? My answer to this question is the outstanding feature of the contemporary European left is its anarchization. Certainly of social movement activism. So the roots of the organisation and cultural shift can be traced to 1968 and the emergence of post-materialism, but the anarchist remodelling, I think, became obvious after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the fall of the Berlin Wall. mutual aid, horizontalism, leaderlessness, communalism, decentralized federation, all markers of anarchism are now part of the current currency of European social movements, and pretty much have replaced the party and the programme in most left-leaning grassroots organisations. So David Graeber called this shift small a anarchism, or sometimes he called it new anarchism. But in any case, from his point of view, it was a shift from class politics and from workerism and class ideology. A distinctive feature of new anarchism, from my point of view, is its conceptual commitment to democracy. The Occupy movement is the best example. So if you look at the declaration of the occupation of Wall Street, basically what it did was contrast what Noam Chomsky calls really existing capitalist democracy with real democracy, where the former refers to the corrupt elitism of the 1% and the latter to the power of the 99%. Has this been a failure? I don't think so, not entirely at least. But for me, set against the historical critique of European constitutionalism, it looks like a dilution of the anarchist alternative, of the transformative project of the 19th century. Democratization, even when conflated with anarchy, as Graeber, that was the argument he made, leaves the idea of the sovereign people intact, suggesting that the 99% can or should speak as one, and it stops short of anarchist reconstitution. It is as if the 99% can wash the state clean by extending democratic control or exerting democratic control of its resources. So the last question, does world revolution still rest on the fate of Europe, and what is the purpose of the left in politics in Europe today? So I have a confession, I'm very wary of the idea of world revolution. I just think it's a myth, I think it's a fiction. So an anarchism revolution is normally understood as a process and not as an event. It has no single trigger and it has no central point. It's possible to look historically and think about sociological trends. It's possible to think about accelerated periods of change. It's possible to think about stagnation. But the idea of the world all changing at one moment, I just think that that's not the way to go. So although Europe is no longer the hegemon it was in the 19th century, as we've heard, the European Union still exercises significant force globally. The well-being of millions of people inside and outside of the continent still depends on European policy. So actually what Europe does still matters, even if it's not the dominant force in the world. In 1947, Rudolf Rocker, an anarchist who was chased out of Germany in 1933, argued that the Bolshevization of Russia and the Nazification of Germany epitomized the failure of the European constitutional project. Both were explained by contingencies of history, but the lesson was that the degeneration of Europe into totalitarianism was predictable and that constitutionalism lacked any tools to defend itself against that degeneration. What Europe had done was usher in an age of competition, had cemented class differences while promoting nationalism and democracy, thus undermining solidarity in the name of freedom. It appears now that constitutionalism is opening a new door to the right. This looks very different to the fascism of the interwar period, but it relies on the same violence and it defends the same principles of extractive, exploitative economics. The purpose of the left was and is, I think, to prevent the monopolization of power by enabling self-government. Anarchists argue that this requires a continual push towards decentralized federation, which means not just micro-political experiments, which is often what anarchism is associated with, but also the reconstitution of local, regional, and translocal associations. So any kind of push you can make to make those associations independent and network them is an anarchizing move for me, and it is a good move. The left can articulate a vision that empowers people, particularly when we have questions of, big questions of justice and injustice put in front of our eyes. But it has to empower people on the basis of what they don't share in common, on the differences that they have. We don't think the same, we shouldn't think the same, we're not going to think the same. It's the state's role to homogenize, tell us what to think, how to live, and ensure that enough of us come up with the same answer. It's up to the left to push against all these pressures to conform. Thank you.
Okay, now it's on. All right, three's the charm. Bertolt Brecht once wrote that the thing that makes communists and revolutionary socialists so unattractive is that they have an answer to everything. And that we should come up with a list of questions that we haven't answered yet. And I think, and that's how I want to structure what in the 10 minutes that I'm able to speak to you. And I want to start with the things that we know. First of all, we do know that we are in a deep crisis, not only of capitalism, but of civilization, and the civilizational character of this crisis is because of capitalism. And capitalism has undergone 4 systemic crises in its history. The first was the Long Depression in the 19th century from 1873 till 1895. The second one was from 1929 to 39, so the Great Depression. The third was the crisis of Fordist capitalism in the 70s, and the crisis that we entered in with the banking crisis of 2007-2008. And capitalism develops through those crises. It transforms. The capitalism that emerges from such a systemic crisis never resembles the one that entered into and caused the crisis. So we got competitive capitalism turning into monopoly capitalism as a result of the Long Depression, also like an open, liberal world order under the Pax Britannica turning into inter-imperialist rivalries. We had the 1930s crisis turning into both fascism and the New Deal. And then as a result of World War II, the internationalization of the New Deal as the Keynesian welfare state in the West. And we had the neoliberal revolution coming out of the crisis of, or counter-revolution, coming out of the crisis of the 70s. And the question obviously is, what kind of new capitalism is going to emerge from this crisis that we're in? And it is a pervasive crisis that started in 2007. I'm convinced that future historians will look at it like this, that it has been a prolonged, a protracted crisis until today. And what makes this, I guess, what should make us feel at unease about today's crisis is that we can learn from the past 3 crises that the first 2 ushered into 2 world wars with 100 million dead people, and the third crisis ushered into the neoliberal counter-revolution, which kind of killed all the 3 pillars to capitalism, namely working class power, trade union power in the West, national liberation power in the South, mostly socialist-oriented, and the power of state socialism in the East. The first 2 were basically kicked away with the Volcker shock in 1979, and then it took 10 years to then undo state socialism as well. So we know that this is a very serious time, and it has to do with the fact that the crisis of capitalism that we're in is, as I think, not just an economic crisis. I call it the 6-dimensional crisis because it next to, on top of the accumulation realm, it's a crisis of social reproduction, so who does reproductive labor? And thirdly, a crisis of social cohesion that is a result of the 4th Industrial Revolution, which is really a threat not only, I mean, to just general workers, but it's a threat to translators, to software programmers, it's a threat to like web designers, journalists, doctors, even teachers if you listen to Bill Gates. So, and those 3 crises that they lead to a 4th crisis, which is the crisis of representation, a crisis of democracy, which then results in the rise of the far right, of neo-fascist forces. And then we have the 5th and the 6th dimension, the 5th being the crisis of ecological sustainability and climate, and the 6th crisis being the crisis of world order, namely that 500 years of Euro-Atlantic domination of the world is coming to an end, or are coming to an end, and that the West is not having it, and is trying to prevent the multipolar world order that is emerging, namely the rise of China and the global South. And the first 2 crises ushered into world wars. We risk running into World War III in the nuclear age, which would mean the end of civilization. So this is a very serious moment, and I think, like, regardless of what kind of analysis we have of the crisis, I think we all are convinced that capitalism is not only ripe to be replaced by an anti-capitalist socialist alternative, it's overripe. So that's something that we know. I think what we also should know is that any kind of challenge to capitalism is based on the working class. Why? Well, I mean, it sounds old-fashioned. We heard about the old left and the new left. Well, I'm a proud representative of the new old left. And why am I saying this? I mean, in the 70s, it was, especially with the crisis of organized labor, there was this idea, oh, now there's the new social movements, they're much more dynamic, labor has been bought off, and also it's not going on strike anymore because it's in the hard defensive in the late 70s, early 80s. I mean, it basically collapses, not just because of Reagan and Thatcher, but because of globalization, or globalization capitalism. And so let's focus on the new social movements. Well, we tested that, whether that's a challenge to the system, and it was called New Labour, New Democrats, and Neue Mitte. And they came to power in the late 90s and early 2000s, or in the 90s and early 2000s, and they showed what we can get from all the issues that have to do with capitalism, the environmental issue, the women's issue, the peace issue. We could see what comes out if they come to power at a moment of the biggest defense of the working class, which it was in the late 90s, early 2000s. So you get emissions or carbon emissions trading instead of eco-socialism. You get quotas on tax on stock exchange-based corporations instead of free daycare and free elderly, like care for the elderly, and so on and so forth. Because like the power that could affect capital to give something back to the working class was simply not there. So therefore, we are challenged with the fact that the labor movement is still suffering from the crisis of neoliberalism, but there is no way that we can challenge capitalism without rebuilding it. Leo Panish once said, there are no shortcuts in history, also not in socialist work, like labor history, and so as a result, we might end up in a situation where we will have to build socialism in a world that looks like Blade Runner. That's something that Leo Panish said. But I think that we're coming to a point where more and more people realize that change depends on reorganizing the working class. So then next was the Euro crisis. I think that what we could have and should have learned from the crisis is that there is no Euro-Keynesianism, that we need to talk about something that's called Euro-socialism. And that's where what we don't know starts, because we don't know what Euro-socialism looks like. I will come to that in a minute. But let's return to the Greek moment. What happened there? I mean, in essence, this is stretching it a bit, but I think, you know, the Lenin saying, the imperialist chain breaks at its weakest link. I think 1917 and 2015 have a lot in common. It was the weakest link of the Eurozone, which made it possible that Schäuble could say, well, you know, we're not going to budge, we're going to let you go. And if Greece had been let go, there was no mandate for SYRIZA. Like it would have skyrocketing prices for medical care. They had a humanitarian crisis already, so it would have been disastrous. And some people like Lapavitsas, they said, okay, well, let's try it. It's better than not trying it. Maybe they should have, we don't know. But nobody, Lapavitsas and everybody else, could not say how long that crisis would actually have taken and what toll that would have taken, also including elections and Golden Dawn and so on and so forth. So. Generally speaking, I think that also we have to have a talk about not what the Greeks did wrong, but also what we did wrong in terms of organizing support for the Greek movement. I mean, in essence, also that was the problem in the Soviet Union or with the October Revolution. Like the problem that they had was not that they failed, because they succeeded, they did the revolution, but what failed was a revolution in the West that they had been waiting for and that they depended on for developing and building socialism. So, and interestingly enough, what came out of the movement, I agree with much of what you were saying, is that in the 90s, and 2000s, where I also was politicized, that was the moment of horizontalism and anarchist movements. And I think that like the SYRIZA moment was a learning process, because it was a learning process of the failures of movementism. Because with the Eurozone crisis, I mean, remember we had protests, horizontalist protests in Portugal under the moniker of screw the Troika. I mean, it doesn't get any more, like, it was very clear what this was about, and 25% of the population were in the streets of Lisbon. I mean, there were more people on the streets of Lisbon than Lisbon has inhabitants, like 800,000, I think, in a city of 550,000 or so. But there was no change of austerity policy. There wasn't even a government reshuffling, right? So there was basically what the late Neil Smith called scaling politics. So they were basically just shifting to the level, okay, we can do something as a national government, it's all up to the EU, so address your grievances to the European Union, and that's basically set it out. And the learning process was, okay, if the government will not do what the populace wants, we have to take power. We have to build political party projects. And those political party projects, however, were built in a situation of working class defense. And it was basically the test of left populism. Like, can you invoke the working class from above and see if it responds, and then build power out of a populist situation? We realize the difficulties of this. I mean, we can also talk about Sanders, we can talk about Corbyn, but I think that's where we're at, that we have made those learnings, and we have to make sense of this. My last remarks, also about what we don't know. If the world revolution is still in Europe, we don't even know what revolution is. Like, I don't think that anyone in Europe knows how to move from here to a socialist society. We know what is, we don't even know what socialism in the 21st century looks like under the condition of transnationalized corporations. Like, what do you do with Google? What do you do with like Alphabet and Meta? Do you take them over? But then what? We have nation states. We're in a capitalist system of nation states, but they are global and like logically global corporations. So we're talking about a world socialist state, but we're very far away from that. And the problem, if we don't have an idea of what socialism looks like in the 21st century, how are we to measure our steps towards it based on how they get us closer to our end goal? And thus, I mean, I work for the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, but ultimately all of us are basically Bernstein. Like Bernstein said, I don't care about the end goal, I care about the movement. Well, we all mostly care about the movement. And I think we have to have a list of questions that are unanswered, and that is the first question, and there's a lot of others as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Johannes, you've got 2 to 3 minutes to respond.
Yeah, so apologies again for the beginning. I felt in the meantime really bad because I did something that I hated my professors most for when they went on talking and talking and talking. Thank you for also, your contributions. I think it's very interesting and inspiring also. I don't have anything that I disagree with, but I wanted to emphasize again that it is just so important that people start organizing wherever they are. I think we are at university, and a lot of people tried in German universities to actually organize something against the German government support for the Gaza genocide. And we saw how difficult that was and how authoritarian actually the state became. I recently had an interview for our Meta25 German YouTube channel with a pupil, an Abiturient from Freiburg, who tried to protest at his school against the military coming and giving a talk there, why, young people should take up arms and join the military, because the German military has a big recruiting problem. You can probably also see now they just started a big poster campaign around Germany with 70 reasons why you need to join the army. And this pupil had his school working together with the German military to threaten him to end his school career, and now has because he also made a social media post, has a lawsuit against him running because of that. So I think in all these crucial areas, schools, universities, but especially, of course, also the workplace, I think we need to start organizing, because we're really at a point that has been mentioned also, the past world wars, and a German state in the middle of Europe rearming and rebuilding their military force is really, the 20 seconds before midnight scenario, and we really should start doing something against it. Thanks.
Nick, if you could go next.
I'm glad to see confirmed that a great quality of Platypus is to open the real questions. Last time.
So sorry, boss.
The real question is my colonial past, excuse me. The real question concerns our present, historic present. You know, Hegel, on a personal book in his youth, has written, "You never be able to be more than your time, but at the best, you will be your time." That means we are all, me included, late with our time, late in our thinking, late in our information. And I just heard the events in Freiburg with the youth. We had no the information. I have 2 or 3 minutes.
2 or 3. 3.
I finished, and I am always thinking to a sentence of Sigmund Freud. I am not a communist sectaire. Freud, his best sentence for me, is not speaking from sexuality or libido. He says, the deaf pulsions progress silently, without explicitation. I thank you. I thank my comrades here to open this silence and to speak for real questions, real problems.
I'm going to get up again. So it's extremely difficult to respond to 3 very different and very full talks. So, but a number of things jumped out at me. One, this issue of justice and injustice, and when we have, these big global world events like Gaza, like Ukraine. Actually, one of the things I think the left can do is try and unpack what is meant by the justice and injustice of these things, because too often what happens is that the events themselves get kind of sucked up in a rhetoric of who is going to sort it out. Not what is wrong. What is wrong about the land distribution? What is wrong about the land ownership? What is wrong about the claim to land in the first place? We could do an awful lot more, it seems to me, when we have these events in front of our eyes. Second, I wanted to reinforce the point about internationalism. I think that is at the core of the left. Third, I wanted to pick up on the point about history, European history. And I think it's really important how we tell our histories. So one of the people I'm very interested in is a an anarchist called Gustav Landauer, who was, some of you may know, was murdered at the end of the Bavarian Revolution in 1919. And he had an idea about revolution where he said, you know, it's interesting that Europeans always trace their histories back to ancient Greeks and Romans, and they regard these people as their near neighbors, although they've been dead to them for centuries and centuries. And yet they regard Native American peoples who live in their contemporary world as strangers. And one of the things that Europeans do is that they keep repeating this history, that we go back to Greece, we go back to Rome. Why don't we tell a different story about our past? And what might that tell us about our present? And what might that help us imagine about our future? So the way we relate our past and the repetitious way in which we do that unthinkingly, I think, is something that we need to attend to. And then the last point, just about horizontalism. So, I mean, you know, I'm quite a critic of Occupy, but I'm also quite positive about it. And I think, you know, we should not have too high expectations about protest movements, but at the same time, I think we have to celebrate the great achievements that horizontal movements and you know, recent social movements have made, and particularly Occupy. So if you think about Occupy Oakland, you know, they lasted, you know, the blink of an eye. They were evicted by force twice in the space of less than a month, and yet they managed to hold a general strike which involved 20 to 30,000 people in Oakland, and they also shut down the port. They later, after the camp had been evicted, there was a port shutdown that ran from Oakland up to Canada. So there were achievements, there are alliances to be made. We don't have to choose class or non-class. We can organise in multiple ways. The important thing is that we find the alliances and we build them. Thank you.
Well, let me start with the Occupy movement, because I also think that it was a crucial moment in history, but not because of the horizontalism and not because of the question of class or non-class, because I do think that it is about class. It's not just about class, but there is no progress without or against the working class. But I think that Occupy was crucial to reintroduce the issue of class into public discourse, and precisely with what people thought was, you know, very, like a very like unprecise class analysis, the 99% versus the 1%. But I think they were poignant and to the point with exactly this analysis. Why? Well, in Germany, if you look at the Statistische Bundesamt, they publish annually who is in the labor market, like who earns a living based on a wage, and who doesn't. And the question is, who can survive without earning a wage? Well, it's those people who let other people work for a wage so that they don't have to. And those people are, in Germany, 809,000 people. They live just based on capital dividends, either through houses that they rent, homes that they rent, and also like their stock portfolios that they have. And if you look at the number of people in Germany, 809,000 is precisely 1%. So it's a very, very, very sharp class analysis. Obviously, it doesn't give you anything about the people with contradictory class locations, you know, management, and so on and so forth. But I think it was a starting point to have us think in class about class in those terms. And now with regards to what I said might have sounded very pessimistic, but that's beside the point. And you know the saying, Mr. Kästner, where's the positive? So I want to say something positive. I think that the 6 dimensions of the crisis that we're in show us a way to confront the system at large and directly. Because, I mean, today it's very hard to be an activist because the whole world is on fire and you don't even know where to start. Do I start with that I can't pay my rent because it keeps increasing? Do I start with precarious employment, be it at university or be it elsewhere? Is it, do I start with the fight against the far right? do I start with the fight against climate change? And you probably know people, activists that are exhausted by that very fact that you don't know where to start. Well, I think that the crisis has led to a structural convergence of issues. Like that issues that used to be single issues, they cannot be dealt with as single issues, right? For instance, people that came out of the Fridays for Future movement, it's impossible to even think about preventing climate catastrophe without solving the peace issue. Like, if there's going to be a new bloc confrontation, there's no chance in hell that we can prevent climate catastrophe. So there needs to be a coming together. The same thing applies for the trade union movement. I mean, the trade unions learned, because of the result of the Ukraine war, that no matter how much, like when they go on strike, like they can have positive results, but they're being eaten up by inflation, and they're also being eaten up by rent, besides the point. So also the unions are being forced to become political. They need to confront the issue of the new bloc confrontation and everything that goes with it, like the attempts of the United States to decouple Europe from China and to decouple the global south from China and so on and so forth. So I think there's a structural convergence of issues, the peace issue, the social question, so the labor issue, the climate issue, and the democracy issue. Because one thing that's happening, here's the cliffhanger, or the end of the cliffhanger. I said that every capitalism develops through crisis, through its systemic crises. So the question is, what kind of new capitalism is going to emerge from this crisis? I call it, that's also the commercial break, in my new book I call it post-liberal capitalism, by which and the analysis is that capitalism in the West is becoming increasingly illiberal or non-liberal, both at the economic level, like China is the last defender of the WTO. I mean, that's amazing, right? Like that was an institution to promote capitalist expansion from the West. Now we are surrendering by introducing punitive tariffs to prevent Chinese capital from entering our markets, right? So that's like very, very interesting. And the second is that capitalism is becoming illiberal, authoritarian internally. We see it in the Palestine issue in particular. And my analysis is it's because liberal parliamentarianism is no longer a viable pathway for capitalism in the West to compete with China. So basically capitalism here has to become more authoritarian in order to succeed in inter-imperialist drive, or I don't call China imperialist, but we can talk about that as also, but like to succeed in that global competition. And that also means there's a democracy issue. And if we combine the democracy issue, the peace issue, the labor issue, and the climate issue, I think we have a chance of beating that system and leading ourselves to revolution, however we're going to do that. We'll find that out.
Thank you to the four of you. We're now going to take questions from the audience, and Jakob will come to you with the microphone.
First, this little girl, so calm, so libre, and so beautiful. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. This question mainly goes to Johannes Fehr, Ruth Kinner, and Inga Solti. So essentially the topic of the 2008 crisis came up multiple times, and then the subsequent debt crisis in the EU. And I think it was really nicely laid out by Inga that that's sort of a global crisis of capitalism through which it is transformed. And as you've all pointed to, there was also this moment of hope that through this crisis there would be some upturn on the left, horizontalism re-establish, like the 99% versus the 1% and so forth. But nowadays we know that there were attempts to sort of take up this momentum, but what has actually happened now, you probably agree, but if not, just correct me, that it was the right which took up the opportunity and is transforming capitalism. So sort of Trump did what Obama couldn't do, and for the EU it's not that clear, but essentially some bureaucratic structures in the EU did what SYRIZA and Podemos couldn't do, and Die Linke couldn't do. So first of all, what went wrong from your point of view? And then what gives you confidence that now, at this later stage, not to say it's the late stage because we don't know how long it's going to take, but what gives you confidence that at this late stage, the initiative can be recaptured?
I think just contributing one very specific point from my personal experience, we had this summer the DiEM25 Academy, which is kind of a gathering of activists of the movement in Belgrade in Serbia. And it was really cool to witness the activists from the Serbian students' movement speaking to our comrades from Greece, from Meta25 Greece, from the Greece youth there, about their experiences, because in Greece, right, there was a left uprising, and then there was the depression because it failed, and that's still there today, according to what the Greek comrades tell me. But still, they are learning, they have experience now from this failure, because every time you fail, you also learn. And society, I think, in Greece, for example, as far as I hear my comrades there, is not at the moment ready to, you know, really put in that effort again, that huge effort of really trying to have a mass movement on the street, because that's every time something that you need a lot of hope, and it also needs this moment of ignition, like it was in Serbia, this train station collapsing because of corruption in the government, and then this was the ignition moment for the students occupying all the universities in Serbia and building this popular mass movement. And the Serbian students had that current experience against the authoritarian state at personal risks of going to prison and so on, being in the middle of that, and then talking to the Greek people that have the experience from the past and trying to learn from that. And I think that's the chance. Not sure, of course, the next kind of wave will succeed, but I think that's the chance. You need to talk to each other to actually see. For example, Meta25 Greece also has now a program specifically on how they could avoid the blackmailing of their banks being closed and the currency being shut down, basically, to how you could actually work against that with using the tax system that you have and kind of reinventing very quickly a new national currency if you have to. So I think these kind of experiences are there, but then the question is when the next wave will come, and then you need to be hopefully able to have learned from the past.
Well, I think it's, we have to, the German saying goes, man muss die Feste feiern, wie sie fallen, so we have to remember the moments where there were alternative forks in the road, or alternatives possible. So I think it's important that you mentioned the moment of hope, and I think it's always important to note what would have been possible if the relationships of forces would have been different in 2008. I mean, the banks were dependent on, they were needed to be rescued by the state, so that was the opportunity to turn them into public service institutions. Like if they say they're too big to fail, which they were, I mean, the libertarian arguments were even worse, so they were too big to fail. But if something is too big to fail, it's also too big to be in private hands. So a case had to be made and was made that they needed to be public utilities. You are right to say that the far right like after the mobilization of the left in particular, the far right gained momentum. I think it's no coincidence that the defeat of SYRIZA in July 2015 and the migration crisis of August 2015 correlate, or like are like so, like, you know, like one follows after the other, because they kind of also logically follow after the other. If you remember the far right here in Germany, AfD, Alexander Gauland, he said he needed to write a thank you note to Angela Merkel for her saying we can do it, because the far right was in crisis at the time, because like all their arguments about Target 2 and like Euro bonds, I mean, they didn't resonate with the working class. But the racism was something, and the petty bourgeoisie. So, but that was something that could, you know, lift them out of a situation of crisis, which it did. I mean, we have to reflect that prior, and moving on, that prior to the 2021, or after the, like around the 2021 elections, when we got a progress coalition in Germany, the far right was at 10%, now it's at 26%. So, like, apparently strategies failed during that time. I think they failed. I think like something that explains it is partly structural and partly tactical. I think that structurally we have to face the fact that fascism does not, like fascism as a movement, as Griffin defines it, emerges in a situation where the left is where the crisis is so dire, the situation is untenable, but the left is too powerless, not powerful enough to exact change that really working people can feel materially, right? So the far right is basically the counter-revolution in a quasi-revolutionary situation where the revolution doesn't happen. It's something that you can find in Poulantzas, you can find it also in Trotsky and other thinkers. And so the question, what gives me the confidence? There are people that could rightfully say, okay, if one thing like the militarism is on track like this, you have like an irrationalized middle class that really believes that democracy and their standard of living is under attack from Russia, China, and Brazil and India, but instead of from its own ruling class, and that are on track to another war, that the war needs to happen before something better can come out of it. I mean, it's basically what happened with World War I and with World War II. We needed World War I and World War II to have an upsurge in socialist movements, that people realized, oh wait, oh yes, capitalism, crisis, fascism, World War. Yeah, there's something to be said about this. But obviously we don't want to be defeatist in that way. So I do think there is room for opening. And one room for opening is that we are experiencing a rapid functionalization of the far right. I mean, heretofore the far right was dysfunctional to transnational capitalism. Like as long as the AfD doesn't say yes to NATO and it doesn't say yes to the euro, the common currency, like it was not a partner for the transnational capitalist class, because the euro is like the stepping stone to the world market, and NATO is like basically the military that defends foreign direct investment. And the far right was against it. But now we're seeing it that the far right is becoming an establishment force rapidly. We see it with Le Pen, we see it with Meloni. They're pro-NATO, they're pro-Euro, they're pro-US, pro-Israel, and pro-military spending. And we see it also with the far right. Essentially, the far right is the last reserve of the ruling class in a populist situation. The ruling class doesn't have, like, isn't no longer, they don't want it. The parties have become the same. Nobody wants to vote for them anymore, but the far right seems to be an alternative. I'm saying they will be in power. I don't think that we can prevent the far right, like the CDU and in Germany, the CDU to govern with the far right. Probably in 2027, at least in 2029. The good point is it's not 1933. Like, Meloni is in power, Trump is in power, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders are not in a concentration camp, but they're out there on the Fight the Oligarchy tour. Same with Zohran Mamdani. He's elected mayor in New York, right? So the struggle doesn't end. And I think that we have to prepare for the moment when that happens. We have to fight now with the establishmentization of the far right. I mean, try to tell East Germans that they should be in favor of NATO, EU, military spending in Israel. that might be tricky. But we also have to think about the moment when the far right is in power.
So just on your point about confidence, I'm not sure I have any confidence actually, but I don't think that's a reason to stop. You know, I just think you have to not worry about it too much. You know, and so I'm a kind of utopian, but I'm also a realist, and I think utopia goes with disappointment. So I tend not to think that, you know, over the next hill we're going to be marching into the light. That's not how I think. I think we have to learn from mistakes, from disappointments. And when you asked the question, I was reminded actually about the election, the first Obama administration, and there were some voices in America which greeted that election as the kind of the realization of Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream, that this was somehow the end of racism in America. That was actually thought. And then we had George Floyd, you know? And there's a whole history of black struggle in America which has learnt to live with disappointment. Does it have confidence? Probably not. Does it give up? No. You know, W.E.B. Du Bois used the idea of disappointment as the way of incentivizing further mobilization. You carry on regardless, even if you're not confident. I think that's the only way to go.
I thank my comrades to drive the question on to pose far right, far right today. I want to speak from far right now and at her origin. When I was a little child, it's more interesting to speak of my life. Is that our great problem? No, we are in the center of our question. I heard, I was 8, 9 old. I heard many friends of my parents in colonial world telling we were wrong to bring them is a nigger, Vietnamese, you know. We were wrong to bring them flushing water, electricity, roads, school. They were more happier without that. Today, that was the origin. Today, I heard the same words with ecologists. We think they are left. It's just this point I was emphasizing.
Thank you all. It's been mentioned already that the concept of Europeanism or pan-Europeanism at one point seems to have belonged to the right and at certain points has been acceded to the right. Additionally, how democratic discontents, particularly in the mid-2010s, seem to have crystallized in large part today as belonging to the right. The AfD comes to mind. Why don't we have a federated states of Europe? Why doesn't the left want a federated states of Europe contra something like the European Union? I'm from the United States. Discontent with the bureaucratism and oligarchy in the US seems to have been channeled into the Trumpian objection to the deep state. I like to think that it need not have turned out that way. Is there any usefulness actually to thinking about Europe as being more than its nations, as something that can become more than that?
Okay, so yeah, really interesting question. So anarchism traditionally is associated with the idea of federation, but it's decentralized federation. So, I mean, it's interesting actually. One of the great sort of 19th century sort of revolutionaries of the anarchist movement, Michael Bakunin, used to talk about the United States of Europe on a model, not a Madisonian model of the US, but a radically decentralized model. And I think, and there are examples of sort of, you know, plans or utopian ideals, if you like, within anarchism, which think about decentralized federation, but they don't want to decentralize the state. They want to decentralize. They want to federate so that you're getting rid of the boundaries of the state. So you're deterritorializing. You're decolonizing Europe. You can't just take Europe of states and stick them together, which is kind of what the European Union did, and then devolve power within it and think that that's going to change things. You do have to federate across and from below, I think, if you're going to change the systems of power that exist within the statist frameworks. So I would say yes, decentralize and federate, but not as the United States did it, better.
Marx had written that the essential of problem is not in the solution, in the answer, but in the way of putting question. Your question among others. I would be happy if we could be tomorrow in a federal Europe without war, without fierce concurrency, you know. And you say, you are a good historiker, that federal Europe comes from the right. But I hope you don't forget that this right presents herself not as a right, but as a left. The first example, excuse me to return in France, is the longest period of presidence of France, François Mitterrand. He came from Vichy, Pétain, collaboration with, not with German, with Nazi. I love Germany. And he refused the grace of a member of Parti Communist during the Algerian War, who was helping the rebellion, and he was decapitated. And one generation later, he created, n'est-ce pas, he abolished la peine de mort. Merci. Who was abandoned since a lot of years. And I finish my answer with Marx again. Marx said in the introduction to the Critique of Economy Politique, it was the first title of Capital, you know that. He said, we must not judge a person with the idea he has from himself. In the same way, we must not judge, evaluate one time, one party, one epoch with self-conscience. The most dangerous far right present herself never like a far right.
I think I want to just go very quickly on that point. I think in the current setup of the European Union, that question of federalization will come up sooner or later, because I think the European Union will have this question of either disintegrating and going back to the nation state or federating. And I think for the left, it's clear that whatever kind of like the movement is, that we need to be exactly like my comrade said here, in favor of decentralizing power, because nothing would be worse than an imperialist United States of Europe, right, where the ruling class has the say, and we're going to impose our will, or the will of the ruling class and the capitalists on the world with a strong army, and so on and so forth. So whether we, on whatever level we are, we need to try to put the power to the people, workplace democracy, move towards this step so that this doesn't happen.
I also think that there is very important arguments to be made that, like, the nation states in a global competition is not the way to go. I mean, for instance, take the crisis of like the block transformation that is both like Bidenomics in the US, but also in Europe, then Next Generation EU, or like the German Progress Coalition, right? They all failed. Like the Germans and the Europeans failed worse than the Americans on this in this regard. A solution to that could not be national. There's no chance in hell that you could have a national solar industry in Germany, or like they collapsed for good reasons 15 years ago. Same thing applies to wind turbines. So there is a dependency on China on this. A solution for the capitalist class could be, okay, well, then let's have it within the United States of Europe, and do it not in over-industrialized Germany, but do it in Romania and Bulgaria, where the wage level is lower. So that would be a solution from a ruling class perspective for Eurobonds. Interestingly enough, that never materialized, because that was what SYRIZA suggested, essentially. Here, I mean, that's not consciously, but that was what was at stake. You can have a Euro-Keynesian solution to the problems of austerity-ridden, the austerity-ridden European Union, stagnant growth, populist situation, people are not happy with all of this, etc. But that solution wasn't sought. Like David Harvey once said, like a New Deal would be the only solution to the problems of the United States, but that any politician who would suggest that would be shot down. Same thing happened in Europe. So that's what I said, why I said that there can't be Euro-Keynesianism. Especially also because of the unanimity principle. You would have to have 27 states, now like 26, but to be on the same page in order to have a Euro-Keynesian alternative. So Europe is not the European Union. I think we need to have Europe socialism, but it would be not through the institutions of the European Union, which are at large militarist, neoliberal, and cannot be reformed.
Thank you. Is it good? Okay. So my question is for Mr. Pagani. So I think Kluskard put forward an idea of how Freudo-Marxism functions to transition society from one phase of capitalism into another, which is consumerist, permissive neoliberalism, and later to another phase of neo-fascism. Broadly, how do you think, ideology coming from the left functions to transition society from one epoch of capitalism to another? And how could left ideology this time justify the reconstitution of capitalism in post-neoliberalism? And please tell me if I've gotten the Kluskard argument incorrect as well.
I am too old, I have no more eyes, I have no more ears. Thank you very much to speak of Michel Kluskar. For those who have no ideas who he was, he left us 10 years ago. You put a very important question. It's not only demagogic. Michel Kluskar elaborate a critique of which is called generally in the media the société de consommation, consumerism society. But he was not against the consummation. Many times he declared in his books or directly with many conversations, he declares, if exist somewhere a consuming society, tell me where it is. I run after it because it's a communism realized. It was not. People that we pointed like consommateurs are producers. You see a video or a flash in information at the TV one speak of the consumer in a supermarket, for example, and when you see quite more near, you see a poor lady. We belong to the working class, or a little job at the post office, and who choose the cheapest products. She's not in the consummation paradise. It's my first answer with a very important question. And the great working in his whole life excuse me, of my friend, it's against this false left I was just speaking, which is the most dangerous mask of the new far right. That is my answer.
Place.
Thanks. I wanted to ask about the left, about this question. I was wondering, can there be said that there's a European left today? What would have been the high point of the left in Europe historically? If there's not a left in Europe today, or if it's weak, why is that? And what would it mean to have a true left as opposed to a false left? Yeah, that's it.
Willst du auch was sagen? I think there isn't one historic moment that like a high point. I think the history of the socialist movement has gone through various high points, and so one was obviously around the time of say 1900 till 1910 or 1909, where the conception was, okay, socialism is going to come. Nobody's going to stop us. The only thing that can stop us is a world war, and then a world war came and stopped the socialist movement. Then again, I mean, the 1917 till 1919 was a high point, or even till 23 a high point of the left. Then obviously 1945 till 1948 was a high point of socialism globally. And then also from the mid-60s, early 60s, maybe till 1973, till the defeat of the Sandinista movement, maybe even stretching to the defeat of imperialism, US imperialism in Vietnam in 75. So I think we've gone through those waves. And even like 2008 till 2013 was a forward movement for the left, even like, because back then the left was faring better than the far right, or was having the momentum. So I think there's various moments. And there'll be some, there's one who, she's been listening to the whole time. And so wait for another 18 years maybe, and then.
I just wanted to add that I think it's hard, of course, there's no organization. Well, I think there is even an organization called the European Left, but anyway, I think there are many different leftist organizations in Europe, and people also, when I'm, because of work for the M25, are in Athens or in Belgrade or in other parts, it, like, I think people feel when you talk to leftists that they are part of a European left. Although, of course, we have currently not very many kind of like strongholds, but one stronghold I just wanted to emphasize and mention again, because they inspired also me so much, are the dock workers in Genova, right? A leftist organization, a union that actually was able to block the port and block the weapon deliveries to Israel. So, you know, I think that's what we can learn from, and where there's also connections. I know that I know a Palestinian dock worker from Hamburg, right, that is trying to unsuccessfully get his union in Germany to do something against the weapon deliveries from Hamburg, but he is definitely connected to the dock workers in Genova, in Italy.
Yeah, just quickly. So I think it makes, I mean, I can identify something historically that's a European left, and it has a history, and do I want to hang on to the idea of European left? I mean, one of the things about the European, or the activists from the historic movement, is that they tended to insulate themselves from non-Europeans. And I think if there's one lesson that we should learn, is that that's not a good move. That we, you know, anyone who thinks of themselves as part of a European left needs to get out more and speak to people who are not from Europe, or who do not identify as European. You know, we have a lot to learn from people in Rojava. We have a lot to learn from people in Oaxaca. We have a lot to learn from indigenous protest movements. We have a lot to learn, and to hang on to something which is quite exclusive seems to me to be wrong-headed. As to the anarchist movement is classically the movement that lost. So perhaps the best is yet to come. Yeah, the social, yeah, exactly. So maybe the best is yet to come. I don't know, but I think it's not from hanging on to something which is exclusively European. There was another part to your question. I'm just trying to remember. I'm not sure I can make sense of what a true left is. I think, what is left changes. I mean, left and right are fluid terms, right? And often, what's left is on the back foot and fighting a rearguard action because of the way that ideas are recuperated so easily. But, you know, it seems to me that, you know, recuperation doesn't just happen once. And we also have to think about the things that have become normalized, that used to be, you know, considered to be utterly unimaginable. You know, it is now not possible, or at least it is possible, but it's a crime to rape someone in marriage. You know, 100 years ago, that just wouldn't have been a problem. So we have to think about what the left have achieved through constant battling. And a lot of these things tend to get lost, but whether there's something called true left, I'm not sure about that.
Before to answer to Erin, I believe, would you excuse me for a mood issue of my memory with my friend, because he was, therefore, it was difficult for me. He was terribly alone in his whole life. Not alone psychologically. He has friends. He had all life, and but he was alone ontologically, because he was waiting a recognition, not from a friend, but from the comrades, from the party. For example, French Communist Party. It was just a little prelude. The best answer, I speak like my job. I have been teaching philosophy in my whole life, and to change style, it's quite more academic answer. The best answer to your question: what is a real left, authentic left? You can open the door where begins the road will lead at the answer you are waiting for in Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Just before the revolution, just before. First, he was the first who was seen the revolution coming. In the Emil, you know, this great Bildungsroman, sagt man in Deutschland, education roman. He says to the mother of his pupil, mother in aristocracy, that she must prepare, she and his son, to the revolution coming. I tell it before in French. It's the words of Rousseau. Nous approchons de l'état de crise et du siècle des révolutions. Des révolutions. Not de la révolution. He had already understood that this revolution will have not end. She will be epidemic. Excuse me for this metaphor hazardous. And in the social contract, he has the response to your essential question when he brings a lot of distinction between the in the liberty, in the concept of liberty, between the natural liberty, the liberty of the animal, and the civil, he says, the civil liberty, social liberty. What is the difference? And he says himself that we must compare what we win, what we lose when we we go from nature state to civil state. Huh? And he say, the natural liberty have as limits the force of the individual. The civil liberty has as limit la volonté générale. The general will, merci. Voilà. This concept of general will is the key to understand that since two centuries, the problem of the state and the relations between state and civil society, bürgerliche Gesellschaft. Nämlich, I speak like Hölderlin, nämlich, a lot of people, typical example, Karl Popper. It's for me the dominant ideology today. It's no more the idealismus. Idealismus was the dominant ideology at the time where the religion was very important in the society. Quite more than now. In our society, in the industrial developed society. But Karl Popper had two enemies, Marx and Freud. There is no subject. What is scientific is only the science of nature. I have nothing, I have not a word to say against the science of nature. I have nothing to say against nature. It's therefore I am against the ecologism, not the ecology. I am not a glaciologist, I am not astrophysician and so on. Karl Popper would say that the volonté générale is typisch du totalitarism. From where comes this notion of totalitarianism? From a pupil of the most Nazi of great philosopher, Hannah Arendt. Fantastic operation. N'est-ce pas? Until this notion of totalitarianism, Hitler was alone in his jail, in his historic jail. Now he is happy. He has with him Lenin, Marx, Engels, Rousseau. It's better for the far right. It's my answer. I open a gate which in Rousseau, in the reference in the chapter 8 of the first book of the Contrat Social.
Just quick info, we'll take about 2 or 3 questions and try to wrap up at 8:30.
There? Ah, okay, too close, too close. Okay, that should work. In the time you've been politically active, how has the left invoked Marx in relation to Europe, and has this changed over time?
Well, I think you wouldn't believe me if I said, like, as the author of the Edition Marxismen, that I've become less interested in Marx over time. I've become the first time I encountered Marx was, I said it before also in the earlier session, was when I was 13, and that was 33 years ago. And now, working on the Edition Marxismen, I wonder how, like, I was trained by Marxists throughout my entire academic career in Marburg, in Toronto, and the various research projects that I was involved in. And I now wonder how much of a Marxist was I, or have I been until now, or rather how far we have come or moved away from the way Marx is thinking. Like even us, or people who identify as Marxists, are quite far away from the Marxist methodology, I would say. But I think, and I'm learning more and more how rich not only Marx, but the Marxist tradition is, like especially those authors that I hadn't encountered as much. I mean, the Edition dates back 20 years maybe, like the excerpts at least, and some of the zetkiewicz themselves. But like Kautsky, I hadn't read as much. Otto Bauer I hadn't read as much, and Clara Zetkin I hadn't read as much, and it's quite a journey. I think I'm convinced, and I'll end with this, that a lot of the problems we're facing today date back to the pre-1914 period, and like both theoretical, but also and especially practical. And I think there's a lot to be learned from those original texts, and that's not just a commercial break for the Edition Marxismen, although it is that too.
I'm going to sound really old now. So when I was at university, I did history and politics, and pretty much everything was Marxism. I mean, the whole outlook of my history teachers, I mean, it infused everything, and student politics was also Marxist. So, I mean, it was the dominant, there were varieties of Marxism, but the debates were about Marxism. And, I mean, that's completely changed. And I sort of, I'm sort of conflicted in a way about it, because I got an awful lot out of my education, but I didn't feel at home with the politics. And that's when I moved to the dark side and came across the anarchists. And so I have a different perspective now on Marxism as a result of that. But it seems to me, compared to the really sort of intense debates that we had in the 80s, the sort of the blandness of Rawlsian politics and there's a great loss. There was a great loss. I mean, so. Yeah, I do look. I mean, maybe it is a sort of nostalgia that you always look back on the past and you remember the sort of the good bits. But I just remember that an extraordinarily sort of intense set of debates all the time, which revolved around Marx of one sort, and it was a rich field. It wasn't just Marx and Kautsky and Luxemburg. Alexandra Kollontai. I mean, there was a whole sort of, politics there to be discovered, and I think we've lost a lot. Yeah. So, although I'm critical, I would want to sort of open up that left that I sort of grew up into. I do regret its loss. Yeah. Marx, I mean, you know, Marx is still, I mean, in universities you'll still come across Marx, but it's not the perspective that it was. I mean, Marx will feature, you know, standardly on a history of political ideas course. You'll get a lecture on Marx. Yeah, and that's it.
Also on TikTok.
Yeah, whatever. But it's not a sort of, you know, you don't have a kind of, you're not introduced to an approach to analysis to think about the concepts that Marx was playing with and which got developed through the work of, you know, a rich body of people. I mean, a really rich body of people. That seems to me to have been lost. Certainly in the UK. I can't speak for outside the UK, but in the UK, I think that's the case. Yes.
Teaches in Toronto, Leo Panich, he used to say that like Marxism in academia, if Rosa Luxemburg and Lenin had gotten positions as professors at university, there probably wouldn't have been an October Revolution. So Marxism disappearing from universities and academia may not be the worst thing. I mean, it is bad, but it survives elsewhere.
A very short answer to the two questions. The second first, excuse me, you have the answer, it's very short. Not in an unknown text of Marx, not in a letter, in the first sentence of the manifest of Parti Communiste. A ghost haunted, Europe is haunted by a ghost, the communism. And for your question, can you repeat it briefly?
How has the left invoked Marx in relation to Europe, and has that changed over time?
When you ask where is the left, and mainly the Marxism left today, it's a question which is under many questions this evening. We can answer almost nothing. It's not in France, it's not in Germany, but we must forget the European centrism, you know. There is 40 million of communists in a state of India, the name of which is Kerala. We are in progress each year. I want to be short.
So my question kind of goes back to the invocation of the question of the European left. So last night we had two events. One was a lecture, a teach-in on the American Revolution, and the panel was about the French Revolution. Maybe this is a bit too anecdotal, but this year was the first year I read Thomas Paine. And what shocked me about Thomas Paine was that he's this, you know, Englishman experiencing both the American and French Revolution and saying this must, you know, his vision was if England were to have a revolution along with France, we would have a kind of transnational commercial utopia, in the best sense of it, right? And what strikes me about this idea of the EU, European left, is it's really divorced from a shared leftist tradition, the emergence of the left, of, you know, in the French Revolution, inspired by the American Revolution. And I think that's an obstacle to thinking about this internationalist left, especially as Europe and America are central capitalist powers that have certain liberal protections, like freedom of speech, for example. So I'm curious, what is your theory of the divorcing of the European and the American left over the 20th century, and how that might have affected the way that we think about Europe and its role in global capitalism? I think that's it.
So that's really hard. So, I mean, you know, the British had their revolution, actually. I mean, and you know, we chopped off our king's head first. And the reason I mention it is because it provided the model. It was the constitutional settlement. And you have the same thing in France. You get a new constitutional settlement. So you shift the power of the sovereign from the monarch to the people. And you have pretty much the same thing going on in America, on a different governmental model. And the idea, I mean, the liberal idea was that, of course, you know, if you could do this in all states, then we would get to the world peace and all the rest of it, and we'd have rights, this, that, and the other. And it seems to me that, you know, when socialism sort of is reborn after the 1820s and comes back in the 1860s, and the International is set up, it's in order to contest that model. It's to internationalize socialism and to think of it not as something that you can deliver through a constitutional change and a system of alliances, which is all based on upholding the rights of the property owners against the people, and then getting the people to buy into it by democratizing those arrangements. So, you know, the whole point of the International was to organize across those states in order to think about a different set of power relations and a different set of international relations. And then on the question of America and Europe, I mean, you know, the way that America, I mean, I'm not that close to American history, but the way that American socialism plays out in America is through enormous sustained violence against anyone who tries to organize against the corporates. I mean, the bloodshed that characterizes the American Union movement, any kind of socialist movement in America, has historically been faced with the most enormous vigilante violence, state-backed violence, Pinkerton violence, you name it, deportations, the lot. So the American tradition survived in the teeth of all of that, and still continues to do so. And what's going on in America now is not new. It's a continuation of a policy that's been there pretty much since the start. It's the most bloody history imaginable. And it was very difficult for socialism to take root in America because of that. And I guess that's, you know, explains partly why you have a different kind of set of mobilizations in America than you do historically in the European continent. It's a different history. But I think that your first point, I mean, the Tom Paine view. I mean, Tom Paine was an awful lot more radical than actually, you know, the way that the constitutionalism played out in Europe. But I think his view was not socialist as such. He was he's a rights, he's an advocate for rights, and and clearly he didn't support the kind of distributions of power as they were defended. But I don't think he had an answer to it, and I think that does come later with the International, with the organisation of the International in 1864.
I am very glad this evening to hear that with my comrade beside me, pardon, I'm very glad to hear that what was silence begins to have words. We have just heard the history of the repression of socialism in the United States. For example, I say always in my video, you don't know my video? I am lost. There is too many. On YouTube. I say I am never anti-American, for example. I am anti-imperialism Atlantist. It's not the same. The words are very important. Excuse me, it's a tradition since Socrates. The great Socratic question is not what it is. That is a scientific question. It is a star or it is a planet. It's not philosophic. The question of Socrates is what you name a planet, what you name a star. He speaks not with the star. He speaks with the astronomer who questions the star. And a dialogue can begin. And therefore, there is the greatest silence is made in your time, more than in the, still more than in my time, on the most terrible massacre on the planet. I told you I was born in Vietnam. 3 million disappears because they have the bad idea to have an option, socialist, communist, at 5,000 kilometers of United States. And it succeeded to 3 million, still 3 million in Korean War, for the same reason. With the same origin that I name imperialism Atlantist. You can be French and Atlantist, American and anti-Atlantist. I am not racist. And the most terrible massacre of all is the most covered by silence. It's in the Congo. About between 10 and 15 millions more since end of 19th century until my youth. And it's all I want to say. I repeat Freud. The pulsion of death are progressing in silence. I am happy that we are fighting this silence this evening.
I actually just wanted to quickly add that from my personal view, as I'm not a historian, right, but from my experience, I think the division between the European history of revolutions, leftist revolutions, is even bigger to the African history of leftist revolutions. And I think I have so much to learn about Thomas Sankara and all these stories. And I think that's even from my point of view, even more important to learn about that history.
Yeah, I agree with the previous speakers that we have a lot to learn from those histories. I mean, the legacy of imperialism, capitalist imperialism, both formal and informal, is devastating. I'm not post-colonial from my perspective. I do recognize what Europe has also, despite those horrific politics given to the world, but I do wonder, or I do think that this is a good time to be interested in what's going on outside of Europe. It's a good time to be interested in what is being thought outside of Europe. Because if you look at like the legacy of the European Enlightenment, of what Europe has given to the world, it's in a quite bad shape. I mean, Europe gave to the world the Westphalian Peace Treaty, right? Like the Westphalian Peace Treaty basically says any country can have any religion it wants, and there is not going to be interference. There's non-interference, there's peaceful coexistence. Well, listen to European leaders these days. Like they've learned nothing. They don't have anything in common anymore with the Westphalian Peace Treaty and what it gave to the world, right? It's regime change, it's moral superiority, and at a time where that moral superiority is really, it's ridiculous. And you can't say anything else. I mean, we're in a situation where 500 years of Euro-Atlantic domination are coming to an end. We're in a world that is multipolar. Like, there's no doubt about it. Like, the economic core of the world is shifting from the north and west to the south and east. And any attempt to prevent this from happening, or like to deny that reality, leads to an arms race, it leads to confrontation, but that is what the EU with the United States is currently doing. And I think we are dealing with a cultural crisis in Europe, also like an intellectual crisis. We will have to protect the European legacy of thought, the good things about it, against the European elites. We're in a situation where Europe is no longer leading in patents, it's no longer leading in economic efficiency and economic output, it's not leading in terms of its infrastructure, quite the contrary. Like when you go to China today, for instance, I always feel like I'm the indigenous people when Columbus came in 1492, and they first saw a rifle, because you always think like, what's this? Like, how am I going to what I'm supposed to do with this? Because of the technology being advanced compared to technology here, and I think this is a real crisis of self-confidence of Europeans. Like, we used to, it was totally normal that in Olympic Games, like, all the medals went to Westerners. Well, they don't anymore. We're no longer best, and that, I think, is for many Europeans a narcissistic, it's harming Western narcissism. And I think the way that Westerners respond to that is, well, if we're no longer number one in economics, in patents, in sports and everything else, we can at least be number one in morals, right? We teach the world morals, and the same morals that we don't longer adhere to. I think that's something to be reckoned with.
This is going to be the last question, and please, if you could weave in your final remarks into that question, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to maybe bring it back to the EU, or one of the items on the prompt I think was kind of one of the things that spurred this panel, which is that there is a kind of crisis of the EU. That also sort of, maybe 20 years ago, most of the critics of the EU were coming from the left, whereas now, for a while, they're coming from the right, and the left became the kind of last defenders of the kind of EU status quo. I guess sort of both yesterday and today I've heard kind of different left perspectives on the EU, for example, or like discontents with it. So yesterday, Dennis Kramer talked about how the EU is this like out-of-touch, administrative, bureaucratic project, and some kind of left response would be almost like an anarchist like response to this like out-of-touch, whatever, like bureaucracy. I think other people will talk about the EU like it's, for example, some like French, German like institution to like exploit the rest of Europe. Other people talk about the EU like it's some kind of, it's like maybe like an imperialist bloc or something like that. So I guess maybe my question was, what do you take the EU to be? How should the left lead the discontents with the EU that are popping up in politics today?
I think for me, the EU is, as the nation states, although of course there is difference in how it is set up and how these so-called democracies work, right? With it's those, both the, I think the nation states in Europe and also the European Union are governing projects of a ruling class that is controlling how they are run. And I think for the left, I think the most important challenge is to go against that. And I think as well as in the national context where the whole parties of the center-right, center-left, and even a lot of so-called left parties, also in Germany, are going into government coalitions and are ruling in a capitalist system. I think then the extreme right that is not in government actually becomes the only alternative in the eye of the common people, who just see that there's different parties ruling and nothing is changing, right? So I think it's incredibly important for the left to oppose that and to oppose this European Union and to go against that. And since this is the last statement, I also wanted to add that I think it's incredibly important as the European left that we look at our common history, and that is still the present today, as I already said, which is the colonial history. And that's what all the European states have in common, and that's what also today's politics still has in common with some of the politics of 100 years ago. For example, the first genocide that the German state perpetrated was the one in today's Namibia against the Herero Nama people. What happened there was an uprising from the colonized against the colonizers. And the reaction was that Hermann von Trotha, the German general, went down with a German army and massacred most of the Herero Nama people there. We have just witnessed something that is similar in the last 2 years in Palestine. And the reaction in Germany is still more or less the same. It's of course not exactly the same thing happening, but there's lots of similarities, and the mindset is still the same. And our governments have sent all the support to this genocide that has happened in my lifetime. And I think that's also, there was earlier the question is where to start. Well, if a genocide happens and your government is also responsible for it, there's no question where to start, right? You have the answer in Berlin, here in Leipzig. Palestinians are living here. They were on the streets. They were beaten down by the German police, the German state. Basically all the parties in German parliament supported this. So that's a really, really easy question for us in Europe as the left to start with, and then of course also to care about the working class in Europe and the conditions and to improve them. Thank you. On which? Well, if the working class, right, which you could see with the dock workers in Genoa, would have the say and would be able to make the decisions, there wouldn't be a support for the Israeli state to actually perpetrate the genocide from Europe, right? If the people would be in power, we would have also the methods to stop this support or to not support this when it happens in other parts of the world.
I'm not sure I've got much to say. I mean, the only thing I would say is, you know, I mean, for all of the ills of the European Union, and there are many which you listed, you know, there is a culture of cooperation that also exists and existed from the start within the European Union, and a culture of cooperating in order to avoid or to find better ways of resolving conflict than had been done in the previous 2 wars. So, you know, since Brexit, I mean, it's a noticeable shift. The cultural shift is noticeable. That, you know, we don't want to cooperate, we don't like foreigners, and we want to put the borders up. And that's a significant move. So, you know, I think what I would want to take out of the European Union is that culture of cooperation, and to root it in other projects. You know, because if what's going to happen is that European states are going to all take this kind of stance now, that we don't want to cooperate, we're only in it for our own advantage, and we will put the borders up against anyone who tries to invade our space because we don't like foreigners, then we have to capture, the left has to capture the language of cooperation through internationalism and build different kinds of associations, which are also designed to resolve conflicts in different ways, but to acknowledge those conflicts exist, and to acknowledge that we have to find ways of, or create conditions which make those conflicts less harmful, where the stakes are reduced, because actually what we want to do is cooperate with each other and not fight each other. That seems to me to be the sort of the cultural lesson to take out of Europe. It constitutionalized it in ways that, of course, undercut all that. But I think that there is a real lesson to be learnt from Brexit in terms of the cultural politics.
Yeah, I agree that like when there's a genocide, if you stay silent, you're complicit. And it is a European movement, right? So it is like a cross-European, it's an international movement. And so there you see a nuclei form how an internationalist movement can come about. And also within the Eurozone crisis, there was and should have been an internationalist solidarity movement with Greece, with the understanding that a progress in Greece, a victory in Greece, is a victory in the rest of Europe, and a defeat in Greece is a defeat for the rest of Europe. It's a kind of thinking that Rosanna Rosanda had, then when she thought, like they had a conference where Althusser and others were coming in about post-revolutionary societies, and she was convinced that both the Soviet Union and this was in 1979, I believe, that the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China were post-revolutionary societies. So she had no illusions about where they were going to develop towards to. At least that was her idea. But she knew that they were super important for the perspective of a revolution in Italy. And her idea was, okay, like, why did the revolution in Cuba in '59 succeed? Why was it killed in '73 in Chile? And she realized, okay, well, it had something to do with how the world powers act, right? We have to analyze the relationships of forces in the world to understand, like, what is possible at the nation-state level. Because the analysis was, of course, okay, well, China came to terms with the US in 72, 73, so they didn't protect Cuba, they didn't protect Chile as the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China protected Cuba, the Cuban Revolution. But so there are internationalist developments like the Palestine movement. Nonetheless, I don't think that like wars internationally, like where we're the farthest from affecting change, is necessarily where we should be, like, focus all our energies towards to. I think the PTB, the Belgian Workers' Party, they have a very clear case to be made that you should be active where you are. So, like, they ask you, okay, where do you work? So that's where you organize a chapter, right? Because that's where you spend most of your time. And if you're a student at university, like, you use your time to organize things like this, right? Where we can come together and talk about alternative theories, alternative ways of thinking and of ways of doing things. Because this will have a lasting effect. Like, all of you are going to go places, and I mean, I sound like an old white guy because I'm an old white guy. But like most people I went to university with, they took what they learned to places where they're doing really great politics in the labor movement and elsewhere, at university professors and what have you. So I think, like, do start where you're at. And then to come to like final remarks about Europe, I think, I mean, it's remarkable that after SYRIZA, after that experience, there shouldn't have been any illusions about the European Union. But the criticism of the European Union, its neoliberal framework, etc., was more developed before SYRIZA was forced into surrender than after. Like, the illusions about the European Union were stronger after 2015. And that's, so it's a kind of Stockholm syndrome of the left with regards to the European Union. And I think, I mean, something, like, given the, like, if the relationships of forces are so important, then I would say I'm a bit skeptical of what can be achieved at the European level. Because if the capital-labor relation is so important, then Business Europe and the European Roundtable of Industrialists have so much more power than the European Trade Union Federation. So the relationships of forces are much better at the nation-state level. Because it's also, that's where the public sphere is. So I think that any change, any Euro-socialism, if it came about, if we are building it, it will necessitate a shift in the relationships of forces at the national level between capital and labor. And any progress that happens at the nation-state level will have effect internationally. It always has. I mean, right, like the October Revolution led to the revolutions here in the West, and so on and so forth. And so I think start where we work, where we live, and we'll take it from here, I would say. Take it up and say what the EU is, right? I mean, like, when the Eurozone crisis happened, there was coming from the left wing of the labor movement this idea of Europa neu begründen, right? There was this notion, okay, like, we need to have a different political economy framework for Europe, and we probably have to have a different, like, we have to build it from the debris of the Eurozone, right? And I think that criticism is still prevalent. Like, all the works that we got from Stephen Gill, from Patrick Ziltner, Ingo Stützle, like all of those who've written about the neoliberal constitution of the EU, they were like, they're still very, very, very important because we still have the fiscal compact, and where the fiscal compact is not in place, we have a EU militarizing to the teeth. And I agree with our comrade here, like, that's the worst thing that can happen, like, if the EU has that military power and then hands it to the far right.
The best answer to every question you put, the best answer is in your hand, in your mouth, in your action. Because since the Enlightenment time, 18th century, the power knows that it cannot keep the power without what was called at this time, for the first time, the public opinion. And now we understand better why I told before that the most dangerous right present himself like a left, because they know that the population don't want a far right, or you understand, or the war, or the violence. Or the best answer is you. You are the force. Excuse me for this Hollywood conclusion. Like in Star Wars, you are the force.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah.